in particular, because it's very hard to imagine. My name is Rachel, this is my mom, Esther. On her 16th birthday, she got off the train in Auschwitz and never saw her parents again. I think it's a connection that we have to make with the young people to realize how they have to cherish the freedom in this country, the privileges that we all have. And while this is a Jewish story, it's not just the Jews. I don't think there is any race that has not experienced the same kind of hate that burns. So, Mama.
Yes.
Tell me about your childhood.
Well, I had a wonderful, wonderful childhood. My parents were very loving. They taught me how to be good, and if I can't do anything good, don't do anything bad. Love all people, love God, and think positive. And this is how I live my life today. That's the only thing I have of my parents, what they taught me.
You talked to me before about that you were a tomboy.
Yes.
And that,
yes.
That you were very, very protected.
Yes, yes. My mom, I was the only child. She just wanted to spoil me and give me what she can. But I just really didn't want to be spoiled. I just wanted to go around and climb the mountains and climb the trees and compete with all the friends who's going to climb the mountains faster. And I had a lot of fun in my youth.
Tell me about the place that you were born.
Okay, you see, the town that my mom was born, it was Hungary then. But then when I was born, it was
in the same house.
In the same house, in the same town. When I was born, it was Czechoslovakia. My birth certificate is Czechoslovakian. But then in 1938, the Hungarians came back. And then in 1942, the Nazis took over. And that was the end of the Jewish population. For 2 years, we had to wear a yellow star. And whoever, when we went out, whoever wanted to beat us up, just did it. My father, who was a rabbi with a beard, an Orthodox rabbi, and they kept pulling on his beard until blood was coming out. So he decided to cut off his beard, which was very traumatic for a rabbi. And when I went to school, next day after the Nazis came in, and the teacher saw the yellow star, right away she pushed me out. Jews cannot go to school. They don't need education, and go home.
Education wasn't allowed, store ownership wasn't allowed. People who owned stores had to give it up.
Yes, everything, everything.
All basic human rights were gone.
Taken away from us. And
did you see the ghetto being built while it was being built?
No, it wasn't built.
It wasn't.
We lived in the houses. You see, they made 4 street, square, where they put us into the families that they had the houses. They took them out and gave them houses of ours, and we had to stay like in one house, 5 families, and some of them had 5, 6, 7 children. I was only myself and my parents, so it wasn't quite so bad. But it was terrible. After 2 years, they took us first.
Mom, would you mind terribly talking about the synagogue first?
That's what I was going to say.
You said 2 years. I apologize. She's always been smarter than me.
Yes. After 2 years, they decided to take us to the main synagogue in the town. They told us to take 1 suitcase and all our beddings, our pillows, our blankets. And when we got into the synagogue, they took all the pillows, cut them open. The synagogue became full of feathers like a snowstorm. And it was the most horrific sight to be seen.
How many people would you say were in that synagogue?
Well, we were like about maybe 2,000 Jews in my hometown. And they all pushed us into the synagogue. And after that, you see, they cut open the pillows because they thought maybe we had some jewelry. They wanted to make sure if they had it, they'll take it away. Anyways, same day they took us into the ghetto. Actually, we went into the same house that was right across from us. And we were watching how our neighbors, that we were such good friends with, in those 2 years they called us dirty Jews. I could not understand at age 14 how I was clean yesterday and today I'm dirty. And our friends, my friends, were terrible. They beat me up because they could. But we had a very good neighbor right across, like the people from the right to me called us dirty Jews, but one from the left called out my father's name during the night and threw over a piece of bread because he knew.
What was your father's name?
Morris. And he called out my father's name and threw over a piece of bread through the fence because he knew we were starving. The Germans took away their product too, but they left them something. And he shared that with us. If he would have been caught, he would have been killed right on the spot.
You know,
Yeah.
there's so much that I think about when you say that.
Yeah.
We would all love to believe that put in that same situation, we would have been that neighbor on the left. We would have risked out, because had he been caught, he would have been shot.
Yes. Yes.
Who would risk their lives to help a fellow man, a fellow person. But from what I've read about through the Holocaust and everything else, so picture yourself, you can barely feed your family, you have no food. And the Germans come into town and they tell you, and you're Christian, and they tell you if you show me where the Jews are, you can have all of their things.
Yes, yes.
That's terrifying. Like I said, we would all love to believe that we would be there doing the right thing. And
Yes,
unfortunately, until we're put to the test, we don't know.
yes. So after being 6 weeks in the ghetto, starving, hardly any water, it was horrible even then. But after 6 weeks, they took us on a train and cattle trains towards Auschwitz. We had no idea where they were taking us, but we had to get on the trains.
Didn't they promise you work? Didn't they say you were going somewhere to work?
Nothing. Just pushed us in. 500 people or so in one cattle car. We had no room not to sit down or anything. We were standing up, and with no food or anything, many of us died. And we had to hold him up because he couldn't lay down. There was no room to lay down. And it was horrible. After
Before, on the cattle car, you told me a story about your mother
yes,
being most upset.
she was crying and crying, you see. The Nazis, we had eggs, chickens, cows, but the Nazis took away our chicken and our eggs. But my mom had one egg, a week or so, one egg, because she knew my birthday is coming, my 16th birthday, and she wanted to make me a cake. She was crying in the cattle car all the way. I'm sorry, Esther. I saved the eggs for your cake, but as you can see, I can't make it. After a few days on the cattle car, we wound up at Auschwitz. On my 16th birthday, May 28, 1944, is when we got off the train, and they took my father right to the right, which later I found out it was straight to the gas chambers. I was still holding hands with my mom very strongly until a Nazi came, took our hands apart, because he looked at my mom and they felt she can't go to work, but maybe I can.
How old was
So
your mom?
she was 50, but she worked very hard, so she looked a little older than that. And so they pushed her to the right. They took me into the barrack. They had bunk beds, 3 stories high bunk beds, where we were 12 women in one bunk bed. We weren't able to sleep even. We were pushing each other, and it was just terrible.
It sounded to me as though it wasn't a bunk bed, it was a pallet
Yeah,
that they could put 12 women on in 3 tiers.
yeah. And I remember, you see, I was brought up very religious. And I knew it's Yom Kippur coming. So they gave, and the Nazis knew. So they gave us our little ration of bread when the stars were out already. So I took that piece of bread and I put it under my head, hoping next day I'm going to have a double portion. But somebody took it away under my head, and I didn't have a rubber portion. Anyways, we were 3.5 months in Auschwitz. We were tortured. We had to kneel on the rocks until blood was coming out. And if we tried to move away, they were beating us with they call it that they have the horse whipping, yes.
So every day in the morning and in the evening, there was a count.
We had to stay.
Yeah, they had to, rows of 5 women
Yeah,
had to stay
in
until
line.
they had everyone counted.
They called it Zählapell. They were counting every one of us. Some of us were so tortured that they went to the barbed wire because they knew if they'll touch it,
Electrifying.
then they won't suffer anymore. As a matter of fact, a couple of times I went to the barbed wire wanting to touch it, but in front of me came my parents' faces. I didn't know what happened to them. What if they're alive and I'm not? I feel very strongly God put their faces in front of me and I couldn't touch it.
Didn't you once tell me that your parents kind of were talking to you and said, what if the Messiah comes? What if the Messiah? If the Messiah comes?
Yes, yes. And you know, we went out once in a while. On the street, they let us out. And everybody, 99% of the women, said there is no God. And if they said Messiah is coming, they did not believe it. There is just no God. I could never say it, ever. No matter how I was tortured, I believed that the Messiah is coming and will be free. So we were standing 5 women in one row, 4 sisters, and I was the 5th. The youngest was my best friend in my hometown. As we were standing in line to be counted, Dr. Mengele, the angel of death, came and he was selecting people. We didn't even know what for. Later we're finding out. So he stood in front of my line and he had this horrible silver cane that he pointed whomever he wanted to take out. And it looked to me like he's pointing at me. I stood out of the line. He took that horrible silver cane, pushed it into my belly button, and took out my best friend and took her away. When we went back to the barracks, the capo, who was so mean, hollers out, is there anyone has a family that was taken away? And the 3 sisters says, yes, our little sister was taken away. And so meanly she points to the chimney, to the gas chamber, and says, you see, this is where your sister is. Up till today, I still have guilt feelings because I thought I was supposed to be there. And so, after 3.5 months in Auschwitz, they decided to take women to labor camps. We really didn't know where, but we had to stay in line In the meantime, I befriended a girl 2 years older than I, and we became like sisters.
What was her name? What was her name?
Helen. And so we were standing in line next to each other, and the barracks were open, so they put a very, very heavy barrier towards the door, left a little opening, and whomever they looked at and they felt they could go to work, they pushed them in. And whoever they felt they can't, pushed them away, which later I'm finding they went straight to the gas chambers. So they pushed in my so-called sister, and they pushed me away. I was standing there and crying. Now I lost my so-called sister too. And as I was standing, this incredible heavy barrier fell over, and the Germans, of course, ran away, and I snuck into the barrack. And this is why I don't have a tattoo. I wasn't supposed to be here. So I believe very strongly God was responsible for that barrier to fall over. I feel very strongly about that. I was brought up very religious, which I'm sorry to say I'm not anymore, but I believe in God very strongly. And I still observe the Jewish high holidays, light the candles, Friday night. But one thing I believe very strongly, God is with us and protecting us. Anyways, by the time I snuck into the barrack, my so-called sister was already taken to a labor camp. But I was taken to a different labor camp. They took me to an ammunition factory where I had to solder handles to the mines that they throw into the ocean. Many times I had to work 12 hours, and every 2 weeks, 24 hours, because the shift changed. So I was so incredibly exhausted that I soldered the handle to my fingers. I don't have any fingerprints. I could be a criminal, but I don't have any fingerprints. Anyways, in the labor camp, we had a little better food. You know, they wanted to make sure we can go to work. As a matter of fact, we still had to stay in line.
How many women were there at the factory?
500 women in the factory. And we had to stay in line for the food. As I was standing in line one day, in front of me came a woman, which I knew very well. She was Hungarian also. Her name was Ilonka. And she came in front of me, but her bowl was already dirty. So I says to her, listen, I see you already ate, but I didn't yet. And she says, well, I'm still hungry. And we were arguing in Hungarian back and forth, until a Nazi woman came. She beat me up mercilessly. I crawled into the barrack. I couldn't get up next morning, but we had a good couple in the labor camp who saw I can't get up, but they were still counting us. So she went to work for me for quite a few days until I was able to get out of the bed. Branya, her name was Branya, and she saved my life. Anyways.
I think that the main thing that all Holocaust survivors share in common is a miracle.
Yes, I believe in
because
that.
That was the only way they could survive.
Yes.
Mom had a few.
Yeah. Anyways, after 9.5 months in the camp, the American soldiers were starting to come forward, towards the factory. So the Germans decided to take us what they called a death march, because we were walking for days and days with no food, no water. So many of us died on the road. After quite a few days, we wound up in another camp, in a labor camp, in an ammunition factory, which was called Salzwedel. And they pushed us in. After 2 weeks, right away, they disappeared. They shut the gates and left us there. This is where I found my so-called sister. We were happy, very happy, even though we were starving. And after 2 weeks, the American soldiers came, shut open the gate, and said, "You are free. Go into town, take whatever you like."
Didn't you say that when they first came in, you all huddled in fear?
Yes, we were, because here are uniforms again, and we didn't know, so we huddled together and crying until they found us, a Jewish soldier that told us in Jewish, "You are free, and go into town, take whatever you like." I didn't want anything. I thought I'll go home, find my parents, everything. But I found a big, big jar of honey.
Every time the story comes out, that jar, by now it's...
Anyways, I licked it up with my fingers. By the time I got back to the camp, I was deadly ill. The soldiers take me to the infirmary, and they called me the honey girl. And that's why my documentary is the honey girl. Anyways, the soldiers liberated us 1945, April 14th, but they were there until September to bring us back to health. We were like skeletons, but they celebrated 4th of July. Beautiful fireworks, flags all over. I was so emotional. I had no idea what they were celebrating. Thank you. Thanks. But I had tears in my eyes. Then my daughter took my little great-granddaughter, who was then 2 years old, in Prescott, to a 4th of July celebration. And this little 2-year-old had tears in her eyes.
Sitting in the stroller and the tears.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
not crying, she's not hungry. She doesn't have to be changed, but she's moved.
By the fireworks, just like,
Singing, fireworks,
yeah,
general
yeah.
feeling of joy.
So she comes home, and tells me about it. I says, well, did I tell you my first 4th of July? I had tears in my eyes. And if I would ever meet an American soldier that liberated my camp, how happy I would be. So she found me a soldier. He lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he heard about me. He was 89 years old by then. He got into his car, drove all the way to Phoenix to meet me.
What a celebration that was.
Oh my goodness. Rachel called all her siblings, her son, her grandchildren, everybody.
Right. So listen to this. We're sitting out on the terrace at Mom's, and the day I was keeping it a surprise that this person was coming. I knew he was coming, but I wanted to surprise her. And then the day before he's coming, my husband says to me, Rachel, do you really think it's wise to surprise a woman with 8 heart stents? And I was like, okay, we'll have to tell her. I mean, right? So we're sitting on the terrace. My children, my grandchildren, my siblings, we're all standing in a terrace that's not much bigger than this podium. Mom has a love. I've never known anybody to have that deep a love for children. She adores them.
I do.
So my grandchildren visited very rarely. They lived back east. So she is having a time of her life with the kids. But meanwhile, I want to tell her about Max. So, Mom, yeah, look how cute they are. Mom, yeah, I know, in a minute. And I couldn't get her attention. She was so enthralled with the kidlets. Finally, I said, Mom! And she looked at me. And I said, remember that soldier you were wishing to meet? She said, yeah. I said, he's coming tomorrow. So being a good Jewish mother, the first words out of our mouth were, there's nothing to eat. We have to go to the store. We have to go to the store. It was an amazing reunion. I have a picture of Max up here if anybody wants to see it later. But now let's go back to the Czechs were the first ones that were sent home.
Yeah.
When the Americans were leaving.
Right.
In September.
In September. The Czechoslovakians sent a ship to take us to Prague. From Prague, they took us with a train to Budapest. But I had to get off the train to take another train to my hometown. As I get off the train, the only cousin that survived of a family of 35 people was liberated first by the Russians, and he came to the train station every day to see who's coming home. And I got off the train. He was very happy to see me, but he says, Esther, no use for you to go home. Nobody survived. The Russians even took over your house, so you have nowhere to go. But we have an uncle in Israel, in Palestine then. I have a very good friend who's taking orphans towards Palestine between ages of 12 and 18. I was 17 by then. I'll introduce you to him, and he'll help you find your uncle in Palestine. He was 23 years old. He took upon himself 60 orphans between ages of 12 and 18. I was 17, so I was able to go along. And, first thing it was, where are you from? Where are you from when we met? So he asked me where I'm from, and I tell him the name of the town. He says, oh, I had an uncle there. I says, well, who was your uncle? He says the name. He was the Spinker Rabbi, if anyone heard of the Spinker Rabbi. And I was in awe of him right away. My father, who was a rabbi also, took me to him to be blessed. I was in awe of him right away, thinking if my parents would know whom I befriended, they would be so happy. Anyways, we started going on the way towards Palestine, walking days and days because the trains were bombed. So even if we got on the train, we had to stop and start walking again. So we were walking, and finally we got into a monastery where the nuns took care of us very nicely. They gave us food, lodgings, but we had to stay in line for the food. And as we're standing in line, they gave us bacon. I, of course, didn't want to take the bacon, not only because I didn't eat it yet, but not in front of the nephew of the rabbi. So I says, no, thank you. And he tells me in Hungarian, just take it, I'll eat it. Of course, I took it and gave it to him. We were walking and walking for months. And so we finally wound up in a displaced persons camp. We fell in love in the meantime. So by the time we got into this particular displaced persons camp, which was in Salzwedel, Germany, we decided to get married.
These will be up here if anybody cares to look at them. But if I can describe Mom's wedding picture. So the was it American soldiers lent my father a coat, and for my mother they took an army blanket and made a skirt out of it and gave her an army jacket, and they all chipped in their cigarette
the kibbutz.
rations.
We were in a kibbutz.
They all gave away their cigarette rations, so Mom should have a white blouse because a bride should be wearing something
white.
And they all made it for her.
That's my wedding picture. Yeah. Anyways, after 3 months, I wanted to show off my new husband that I know how to ride a bicycle because my next door neighbor had one. So I asked for her to loan it to me. I got on the bicycle and I'm hollering, Joe, Joe, look, I'm riding a bicycle. As I was talking to him, I fell down and I broke my ankle. So they took me to the infirmary, which were...
Hadassah, no?
Yeah.
Hadassah.
Yeah. In the hospital. And I threw up. And the nurse tells me in German, are you pregnant? I says, I didn't understand it. But they had a Hungarian doctor on the 2nd floor. They took me up to him, and he says, you're pregnant. I says, how? He looks at my fingers. The United Nations gave us a very thin gold wedding band. And he looks at my fingers and he says, "You're married." I says, "Yeah, so?" He says, "So that's why you're pregnant." I thought I'm just having fun. I didn't know. I was very naive.
Well, as we said before, and Mom has told me that in Europe in those days, the night before you got married is when your mother explained the facts
That's of life.
Well, her mother was gone.
Yeah.
She had absolutely no clue how she got pregnant.
Just because I got married, I'll be pregnant too. I thought I was just having fun. So anyways, the kibbutz decided to try to find a way to get us out of Germany. They didn't want the baby to be born in Germany.
Mom, I hate to interrupt you, but I gotta say, and when Daddy took these 60 orphans across Europe towards Palestine, the family joke is that he found homes for 59. But he didn't know what to do with her, so he married.
Yes, yes. Finally, the kibbutz found a way for us to go to France. We stayed there quite a few weeks until we finally got on the ship towards Israel.
Do you remember the story you told me about France and that other couple?
No, that was after.
In France?
Yeah, but when we were going towards Canada.
Okay.
Anyways, we got on a ship. We were traveling days and days because the ship sometimes was broken. They had to fix it. But finally, we got to Palestine. We already saw the port of Haifa. We were already singing the Hatikvah when the British caught us, took us off the ship by force. They threw tear gas on the ship and took us off by force, put us on another ship, and took us to Cyprus. We were there for 6 months. We had to build our own tents. We were 3 couples in one tent. We had one kind of bed. It was not a bed, it was like 3 woods put together. And we had to sleep on that for 6 months.
But the reasons were all political.
Yes.
They would be,
You know, the British wanted the Arab oils, and the Arabs said no Jew can come to Israel. So they complied. Anyways, after 6 months in Cyprus, they decided to take 50 people once a month. Being I wasn't 18 yet and pregnant, we were among the first ones to finally get on a ship and go to Palestine. We got on a ship called Exodus. And finally, we got to Israel. 2 weeks later, Rachel was born. And we had a very, very happy life, very poor, very poor. But we were very happy. You see, I'm still terrified of uniforms, of policemen, up till today. But I wasn't afraid in Israel of any policeman. Even though I would have committed a crime, I would have been punished. But here is Jewish policemen. They can do no harm to me.
So she says she was happy
Very happy.
and poor, and the Arabs were invading
Yeah.
all the time,
Yeah.
shooting people, and
Yes, yes.
it's
We
just
lived,
so interesting because she was in Arab Israel, and
yeah, we lived near Tel Aviv in a town called Shonat Atikva. And the Arabs were like maybe a quarter of a mile from us. They used to come in the middle of the night with knives and called jihad something, and we had to run out of the town.
where was Daddy?
Yeah,
In the army.
yeah. But when 1948, the War of Independence came, my husband went into the army right away. And with 3 of his brothers. One of them worked in the Weizmann Institute, actually working on the first atom bomb. And he got very, very sick. He caught leukemia, and 3 months later, he died. We were by then living like 6 years in Israel. And my father-in-law, who was also a rabbi, lived in Toledo, Ohio already. He sent such sad letters, how sad it is to lose a child, which I'm sorry to say, I understand now. 2 of my children died within 15 months apart. They were born 15 months apart, and they died 15 months apart.
My brother just died on Mother's Day this year.
Yeah, yeah. And so my husband says, well, we have to go to the United States. I have to listen to my father. So we went first, we had to go to France to wait for an American visa, but we got, in the meantime, a Canadian visa, which we gladly accepted it, just to get out of, Europe and all that horror, trying to forget.
But this is the time you went back to France and you met that couple.
Yeah, but we went into a motel, and there was a couple with us one day, and we were really kind of starving. My father-in-law used to send us money, but he didn't have all that much either. And there was this couple who hardly had anything at all. And one day, when we went shopping, they took care of Rachel. And when they went shopping, we took care of her son. And one day she says they're going shopping and then bringing their son. And it's already midnight and they're not showing up. All of a sudden they show up to apologize, and they said they went to near the ocean.
The river.
Yeah, they couldn't take it anymore and they just wanted to kill themselves. And so they left their son with us. They wanted him to survive. That was a very sad experience.
They had lived through the war.
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
poverty and desperation.
yeah, yeah. Anyways, after 6 months in Paris, we finally got the Canadian visa. So we went to Canada by the port My father-in-law lived in Toledo, Ohio, like 60 miles from Windsor, Ontario. So we moved to Windsor, Ontario. He came every Sunday to visit. And we were very happy. Poor but happy. So after 6 years in Canada, we finally got the visa to go to the United States. We were very happy. We wound up in Brooklyn, New York.
Tell them about Ilonka. Tell them about Ilonka.
In the meantime, yes.
The woman that cut the line in front of you.
And I was beaten up. And while we are in Canada, I already had 3 children by then. I was walking them in the carriage and Rachel walking with us. All of a sudden I see a woman running and I see, Ilonka, where are you running? She says, you mean you're not gonna beat me up? I says, why should I? You were hungry, I was hungry, but today our stomachs are full. We became the best of friends while we lived in Canada.
What about Branya? Was that in Canada or in Brooklyn?
No, in
Branya
Canada.
Was also
Branya was,
in
yes,
Brooklyn.
yeah.
Tell them about Branya.
Yeah. Anyways, we were in Brooklyn. One day we were walking, my husband and I, and we see a new bakery. My husband says, let's go and see if we can afford some delicacies. And we go in, and my husband hollers, Branya, and I holler, Branya. My husband's, where he lived, Branya lived also. And of course, I knew Branya from the camp. She was very happy.
She's a Christian couple.
No,
She
she
was
was,
Jewish also,
yeah.
but she was the one
A
who
very
took
good
Mom's
couple.
job in the line and saved her life.
Yes, she saved my life when I was beaten up and couldn't work. Anyways, we lived in Brooklyn a few years, I think about 18 years, till one day in 1975, I had 4 children by then, and my husband wanted so badly for my children to have an education because we couldn't. And my older son, who was so smart, so very smart, but he hated high school. He hated school. We had to push him through high school. After a few months, he went to work to Chase Manhattan Bank. And after a few months, he says to his father, Dad, one of my good friends is going to Phoenix, to ASU. I would like to try to go to college. My husband was so happy. Here is the money, just go. A few weeks later, he calls up, Dad, I'm sorry. I still don't like school, but I'm not coming home. I'm gonna learn to be a mechanic and stay in Phoenix. I was so unhappy that my daughter, who was 15 months younger than him, the two were very close together. I mean, all my children loved each other, but those two were very close. So my daughter says, Mom, don't worry. I'm going to go to Phoenix and I'll bring Mark home. I was very happy. She calls up a few weeks later. She says, Mom, I'm sorry. I can bring Mark home, but I'm not coming home either. So my husband says, well, I have to go to Phoenix and see what's the big deal. 3 days later, he calls up, he says, Esther, pack up, we're moving to Phoenix. And this is how we are here.
They left me in Long Island.
Well, she already had 2 children by then. But my youngest son, who was 13, he had to come with us. And so we lived in Phoenix for many, many years. And
So mixing the very sad part of your story with some of more humorous.
yeah.
How about when, after 3 kids, you went to the doctor?
You see, I was still very naive, even after 3 kids. So I had a Hungarian doctor. So I tell him, listen, I have 3 kids, we really can't afford anymore. What can I do? He says, drink lemonade. I says, when? Before or after? He says, instead, cool off. Yeah, 10 years later, I forgot to drink lemonade. And I got pregnant again. I just need to tell you these stories so you wouldn't be sad of what I went through. We need a little laughter now and then.
Tell them about, Mom and I speak at Yavapai College. They have a program called OLLI, O-L-L-I, and we teach memories of a Holocaust survivor there. And what happened one day, a young man stood up.
Yeah, you see, and Steven Spielberg made that movie Schindler's List. He took all the proceeds, sent out people from Hollywood to Holocaust survivors who wants to make a tape of their life story.
They were all in Washington, at the museum.
My husband and I made a tape. When the woman from Hollywood finished my story, she says, Esther, how do you feel about the Germans today? I says, well, I cannot forget the horror they put me through, but I can forgive. Because if I don't forgive, if I hold a grudge, I only hurt myself. This woman hugged me, telling me I was the first Holocaust survivor that answered the question the way I did. But I believe it. If I hold a grudge, I only hurt myself. Anyways, when we were talking at the Yavapai College, and I'm talking about forgiveness and about my whole story, a man comes to me and says, thank you. I have a brother whom I haven't spoken to in 20 years because he did something wrong for me. But if you can forgive the Nazis, I'm going home and call my brother and tell him I forgive him.
Yeah.
Made me feel very, very good.
We've had a lot of that. We have letters, hundreds of letters from, we like to speak at high schools.
Yes.
And we have letters
thanking me
thanking her
and telling me, Mrs. Bash, we'll make sure it'll never happen again.
And that's why we do what we do. It's
And here,
important.
and here we think teenagers are only into themselves. Not so. Not so.
At one school, a kid got a senior and said, what can I do
Do.
to make sure this never happens again?
Yes.
And I said, well, you can tell people that you met a survivor. You can tell people who don't even believe that it happened, or
Yes.
that it was greatly exaggerated, which I've heard. You have an answer. Oh no, I was there. I heard every word she said. That's why we do this.